Joining late-night talk show host who, thanks to the Trump administration, is now available.
Under the warm glow of studio lights, Stephen Colbert stands before millions. Sharp suit, perfect timing, every joke landing like a symphony. The audience laughs, roars, and applauds. But behind that laughter lives a man who once knew only silence. Long before The Late Show, before the Emmy Awards and the political satire, there was a 10-year-old boy staring out of a window, waiting for a father and two brothers who would never come home. Grief became his shadow, humor became his armor, and the stage became his sanctuary. Through irony, he built a fortress. Through laughter, he found truth. Yet, for decades, he hid behind the mask of parody, a man pretending to be someone else, until one day, the act began to crumble. So who is Stephen Colbert, really? A comedian? A philosopher? A man haunted by tragedy, or healed by it? This is the story of how one of America's greatest late-night hosts turned heartbreak into hope, pain into purpose, and laughter into the language of survival. Stephen Tyrone Colbert was born on May 13, 1964, in Washington, D.C., the youngest of 11 children in a devout Catholic family. His father, Dr. James Colbert, was a respected educator and dean at the Medical University of South Carolina. His mother, Lorna, was the emotional heartbeat of the household, nurturing, patient, and endlessly strong. When Stephen was still a child, the family relocated to Charleston, South Carolina, a place of southern charm, gentle tides, and quiet afternoons. In that large, chaotic home filled with siblings and laughter, young Stephen learned the rhythm of conversation, the warmth of storytelling, and the comfort of humor. But the laughter stopped one ordinary morning in 1974. A plane carrying his father and two of his brothers, Peter and Paul, crashed near Charlotte. None survived. Stephen was just 10 years old. The world went silent. His once bustling home became a house of whispers and grief. His mother, shattered but steadfast, became the pillar that held what remained of their world. She taught him to keep faith, to find light even in devastation. Stephen retreated inward. Books became his escape, imagination his refuge. While other kids played baseball, he lived in worlds spun from ink and paper, where he could rewrite endings, where no one ever had to die. That early loss etched something permanent into him, an understanding that joy and sorrow are not opposites. They are partners in survival. And though the world saw only a quiet, polite boy with thoughtful eyes, something deeper was forming inside. A resilience born of tragedy, and a quiet promise that someday he would make people laugh again. By the time Stephen reached college, his grief had shaped him into a quiet observer. Thoughtful, curious, always searching for meaning. He enrolled at Northwestern University, majoring in theater. There, surrounded by artists, misfits, and dreamers, he discovered something unexpected. Performance wasn't just about pretending, it was about revealing. He joined the Second City in Chicago, an improv troupe known for producing comedic legends. It was chaos, fast-paced, unpredictable, electric, and Stephen loved every second. On stage he could experiment, fail, and still make people laugh. Humor wasn't just an act anymore, it was healing. At Second City, he met fellow performers who would change his life: Steve Carell, Amy Sedaris, and Paul Dinello. They were fearless, witty, and kindred spirits who shared his love for satire and absurdity. Together, they developed sketches that were sharp, strange, and deeply human. But success didn't come easily. His early gigs barely paid rent, and rejection was constant. He wrote for The Dana Carvey Show, a show filled with brilliant comedians but canceled after just 7 episodes. The industry didn't know what to do with Stephen's smart, subversive humor. Still, he refused to compromise. While others chased fame, he chased truth. The idea that comedy could illuminate, not just entertain. That philosophy came alive in Strangers with Candy, 1999, the cult TV series he co-created and starred in with Amy Sedaris and Paul Dinello. It was bizarre, outrageous, and entirely unlike anything else on television. Though the show wasn't a commercial hit, It established Colbert as a writer and performer with a distinct voice, razor-sharp wit wrapped in sincerity. He was on the verge of something bigger, because somewhere in New York City, a show called The Daily Show was looking for a correspondent who could mix intelligence with satire, someone who could make America laugh at the truth. Stephen Colbert was about to find his calling. In 1997, Stephen Colbert walked onto the set of The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, a small cable program that was quietly redefining political comedy. He wasn't just another correspondent. He was sharp, composed, and delivered satire with the gravity of a seasoned journalist, while holding back a mischievous smile that said he knew exactly how absurd it all was. Night after night, Colbert's fake seriousness became his greatest weapon. He would dissect politicians' contradictions with surgical precision, turning hypocrisy into punchlines. Audiences began to notice. So did Comedy Central. By 2005, they offered him something audacious, his own show. The Colbert Report was born, a parody of right-wing punditry, with Colbert playing an overconfident, patriotic, truth-twisting news host. It was satire wrapped in sincerity, a mirror held up to America's political media circus, and the world loved it. The show exploded in popularity, earning multiple Emmy Awards and turning truthiness, one of Colbert's invented words, into a cultural phenomenon. His character was absurd yet believable, a reflection of how power can manipulate perception. Behind the desk, Colbert was fearless. He roasted presidents, grilled senators, and even performed at the 2006 White House Correspondents' Dinner, staring directly into the eyes of George W. Bush and delivering jokes that sliced through the air like blades. Many called it one of the boldest moments in modern comedy. But fame is a double-edged sword. The more successful he became, the more he disappeared behind his on-screen persona. For 9 years, he played Stephen Colbert, a fictional version of himself so convincing that even he sometimes forgot where the character ended and the real man began. Audiences saw a confident, satirical genius. Behind the scenes, he was exhausted, trapped between authenticity and expectation, between the laughter he created and the silence he carried. Still, he never stopped. Because for Colbert, comedy wasn't just performance. It was mission, to challenge, to comfort, and to remind a divided nation that truth can be funny, and laughter can be revolutionary. By the time the Colbert Report reached its final seasons, Stephen Colbert had become a symbol, the voice of irony in an age of outrage. But behind that polished satire, the man himself was cracking under the weight of perfection. Night after night, he performed as a character, a parody of arrogance, always on, never breaking. The public adored him, but few realized the toll it took. He had spent nearly a decade living inside a mask, and the mask had begun to suffocate him. As politics grew darker and the lines between truth and performance blurred, even Colbert's satire sometimes drew controversy. A few segments were called too harsh, others too political. Some critics claimed he was no longer joking, that his humor had become activism. But what the audience didn't see were the quiet nights when Stephen questioned if people still laughed with him or simply at him. The character he'd created had devoured the man he used to be. When the Colbert Report ended in 2014, fans celebrated the legacy of the show. But for Stephen, it felt like a funeral. He had spent years behind a wall of irony, never showing his true face. Now, without that persona, he wasn't sure who he really was. And yet, endings have a strange way of leading to new beginnings. When David Letterman announced his retirement from The Late Show, CBS offered the chair to Colbert, not the character, but the man. It was a terrifying prospect. No mask, no alter ego, no protective irony. Just Stephen Colbert, the human being. Would audiences accept him without the satire? Could a man who spent years hiding behind humor finally let the world see his heart? The stage was set for the most difficult act of his life, not to make people laugh, but to make them feel. When The Late Show with Stephen Colbert premiered in September 2015, America held its breath. The man who had once hidden behind a character now stood alone. No satire, no armor, no shield. Just himself. The first months were rough. Ratings slipped. Critics called him too polite, too restrained, missing his edge. Some wondered if the real Stephen Colbert could ever live up to the myth he'd created. But slowly, something remarkable happened. Without the mask, the man began to breathe again. He rediscovered warmth, honesty, and vulnerability, qualities that had always been buried under the persona. Instead of mocking his guests, he listened. Instead of performing, he connected. Then the world changed. The 2016 U.S. election turned political discourse into chaos, and late-night television became a battleground. For many Americans, laughter was no longer enough. They needed clarity, empathy, and truth. Stephen stepped forward, not as a jester, but as a guide. His monologues became therapy sessions for a nation in turmoil. Witty, sharp, but deeply human. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was healing, both himself and his audience. Night after night, his authenticity began to shine. The awkwardness faded, replaced by sincerity. Viewers returned. Awards followed. The Late Show became one of the most watched programs in America, not because it was funny, but because it felt real. Behind the desk, Stephen found redemption, not in applause, but in honesty. He proved that laughter didn't have to come from a mask. It could come from a soul that had survived pain and chosen kindness anyway. For the first time since childhood, Stephen Colbert wasn't pretending to be anyone else. He was just Stephen, a man who had turned loss into light, grief into grace, and humor into hope. Stephen Colbert's legacy isn't built on laughter alone. It's built on the courage to face darkness with light. He redefined what it means to be a late-night host, not just a comedian behind a desk, but a conscience behind a smile. Through the Colbert Report, he proved that satire could be a weapon for truth, that humor, when wielded with intelligence, could expose hypocrisy and demand accountability. With The Late Show, he went further, showing that sincerity and compassion could be just as powerful as mockery. His interviews often became confessions, where politicians, actors, and even pop stars opened up in ways they never had before. Because with Colbert, people didn't just come to promote, they came to reflect. A generation of comedians, from John Oliver and Trevor Noah to Samantha Bee and Hassan Minhaj, carry his influence. His rhythm, his fearlessness, his moral compass echo across the comedy landscape. But beyond television, his impact is quieter and deeper. He reminded millions that intelligence and faith, humor and grief, can coexist. That laughter doesn't deny pain. It transforms it. Stephen Colbert didn't just entertain America. He taught it how to laugh again. Not to escape truth, but to embrace it. And in doing so, he became something rarer than a celebrity. He became a teacher, using comedy not to distract, but to heal. Away from the cameras and the applause, Stephen Colbert lives a life rooted in gratitude. He often speaks about faith, not as dogma, but as acceptance. The kind of faith that allows a person to look at pain and say, "This too is a gift." In interviews, he's candid about grief. He calls it a form of love. The depth of sorrow, he says, is proof of how deeply we have cared. That perspective was shaped by his mother, who, after losing her husband and sons, still woke each morning with quiet strength and a gentle smile. For Colbert, joy isn't the absence of suffering. It's the ability to find meaning within it. He meditates, spends time with his wife, Evelyn, and their 3 children, and tries to live each day with humor and humility. Fame to him is not a destination. It's a stage from which he can share kindness. He once said, "You can't laugh and be afraid at the same time." That belief has guided his entire journey, from a boy lost in grief to a man who turned laughter into light. Now, when he looks into the camera at the end of The Late Show, there's no mask, no irony, no distance, just warmth, the reflection of a man who has made peace with both the joy and the tragedy of his life. And in that peace, Stephen Colbert found something even greater than fame. He found himself. Under the golden lights of the Late Show stage, Stephen Colbert still smiles. Not the rehearsed grin of a performer, but the calm joy of a man who has survived himself. Every joke he tells now carries a heartbeat. Every laugh he shares feels like a small miracle. His story began with loss, a silence so deep it could have swallowed him whole. But instead of letting grief define him, he transformed it into grace. He learned that the greatest act of courage isn't standing in the spotlight, it's standing there as who you truly are. Stephen Colbert's life reminds us that laughter is not the opposite of sorrow. It's the echo of resilience. That humor, when born from empathy, can be a bridge between pain and understanding. So the next time the audience roars, and Colbert's eyes glimmer beneath the lights, we're not just witnessing comedy, we're witnessing healing. Because sometimes the people who make us laugh the most are the ones who've cried the hardest. And in the end, Stephen Colbert taught the world one powerful truth. Even in darkness, light is possible, if you dare to share it.